So, this happened. Before we start talking about this, we need to make one thing about this game abundantly clear. It seems like the internet has done a good job of both spreading and accepting this news, but just in case you haven't heard, this is a remake, not a remaster, and there's a huge difference between those two things. There's a lot to unpack there, and a lot of different thoughts on the matter have been thrown around, but I won't get too much into rabid speculation in this video. For now, let's just stick to 4 important things to remember whenever you're thinking about this game. The story may now be subject to change. The gameplay may now be subject to change. The environment may now be subject to change. The character design may now be subject to change. Of course, it's not as if these theoretical changes are being made by Rogue Elements. Kitase, who directed the original game and was credited with the base story, is producing this game. Nomura, who was responsible for the character design and also credited with the base story, is directing. Nojima, who wrote the scenario for the original game, will similarly be writing the scenario for this one. Not that any of that necessarily means anything, since people still hated the Star Wars prequels despite the involvement of George Lucas, but whatever. Before we get into analyzing this trailer, some other news that's important to go over. According to interviews with Nomura, this remake has been in development since before the port of the PC version. When talking about the nature of this remake, Nomura said, "If we were to simply just make the graphics look pretty for the new generation consoles, I don't think it would surpass the original version. If that's what you wanted, I think it'd be enough to just play the original international version on PlayStation 4, and it would be satisfying enough." In another statement, he said, "We've announced an HD port version on the PlayStation 4, and then we have the remake coming to PlayStation 4. You'll have this extremely, very, very pretty Final Fantasy VII existing on the same plane. We feel that if that happens, it's like, why have the exact same game?" This is the mentality that I think we should all have going into this, and personally, I'm fine with that. As much as people often complain about changes that remakes make to their source material, I'd much rather watch something interesting, like a bad remake of Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, than something that is simultaneously bad and uninteresting, like the shot-for-shot remake of Psycho. People like whining about graphics and saying that they can't play old games because of bad graphics or sound quality or what have you, but if a game is really that good, it shouldn't matter. You wouldn't colorize Citizen Kane, after all. Or at least you shouldn't. But one last piece of news before we get to actual analysis. The game's official name hasn't actually been announced yet. We'll probably hear more about this later this year at TGS, or perhaps a little bit later, since Square promised to share more information this winter. We'll also probably find out details of its timed exclusivity, because it is, in fact, only a timed exclusive to the PlayStation 4. And now on to the actual trailer. Of course, everything in this trailer is pre-rendered, and that tells us 2 important things right off the bat. Nothing we see is real, but everything is deliberate. So what exactly do I mean by that? Nothing here is necessarily representative of what will appear in the final game, because it was all prepared specifically for this trailer. But it also means that since they had to go through and add all the details by hand, nothing here is by accident. The entire trailer is built around slowly revealing what it is to its audience. The trailer is filled with visual cues to let us know that we are in Midgar, but it doesn't actually contain many accurate representations of the Midgar that we know. For instance, this trailer shows us a playground, and there was a very important playground in Final Fantasy VII. This one doesn't look exactly the same though, and it also doesn't even appear to be under the plate anymore, because we can see sunlight hitting it directly and tall glossy skyscrapers in the background. Speaking of those skyscrapers, Midgar has never been portrayed with such buildings, at least not to my knowledge. Even on the top plate of Midgar, the more affluent part of the city, we never saw skyscrapers of this scale, or really anything that looked this terribly modern. All of the construction equipment that we see around the city was seen during the motorcycle sequence in the original game, and was heavily featured in Crisis Core, even though it wasn't really present in the original game when we saw the city from overhead. You know, the roads that we see here are actually really significant. Keep in mind that the original depiction of Midgar in 7 was itself inconsistent. Those highways are iconic and really heavily featured during the motorcycle sequence, but they're mysteriously absent in the overhead shots of the city, and then pretty much for the rest of the game. But in this trailer, they're actually featured really heavily. In fact, the entire upper side of Midgar is featured really heavily. The final shot of the trailer is a slow camera move down from the plate into the slums, but only a few shots before that one actually take place below the plate. The others take place under clear daylight, or at least in areas that obviously aren't the slums. It's interesting, to say the least, that there's so much focus on this part of the city. Again, I think it's because we're all able to recognize the iconography of the upper level of Midgar very easily. It's very iconic, after all, even though we don't spend much time there in the original game. Other than the opening bombing sequence and a brief return to the city later in the game, the player never sees much of Midgar other than the slums below the plate and the Shinra headquarters. The main takeaway that we should get from this is that the design of Midgar is going to change, and it's probably going to change a whole lot. We do get one shot that shows Midgar looking a lot more like what we would expect, with smaller houses and the huge spotlights in front of the Shinra building, but even here, there's observable changes with the addition of all the construction equipment. The fact that these skyscrapers are so heavily featured despite never appearing before is awfully telling to me. They're trying to tell us up front that things are going to look different. Also, the look of this city is, I don't know, brighter? The colors in some of these shots are really similar to the visual direction of Advent Children, but on the whole, this trailer is much more colorful and brightly lit than that movie. It's definitely more brightly lit than the original game, where we never even see Midgar during the day. Before we move away from the visual design of Midgar, a few other things. We see several road signs during this trailer. The most obviously placed one is the 7th Gate exit. This is another one of the elements that was really obviously placed in this trailer so that when everyone was initially watching it, it would be visible and legible and start to clue the audience in on where the trailer was taking place. But there are much more interesting signs on these roads. Here you can see distances to both Kalm and Junon displayed. For those who don't know or don't remember, those are two towns outside of Midgar, one relatively close by and one basically on the other side of the continent. I think there's something really interesting about these signs though, and it might be so obvious that the meaning of it kind of blew past some people. These signs could potentially point to a really extreme redesign of the world. If you think back to the original game, you'll recall that there aren't any roads connecting Junon and Kalm to Midgar, or at least not ones that we ever saw. In fact, when the protagonists have to make their trek from the Midgar area to Junon, they have to, number 1, hike through the wasteland around Midgar. Number 2, catch a chocobo. Number 3, cross a marsh and outrun a horrible snake monster. Number 4, pass through a narrow cave full of monsters. Number 5, trek across more open grasslands and through woods. There is no way to make this journey by car. Mountain ranges block the Midgar area off from the Junon area, and it's only convenient to navigate through this space once your party has the airship later in 7. I suppose that there could have been some roads that the team couldn't take because they were worried about Shinra's highway patrol catching them, but hey, we've already observed firsthand how effective those guys are at catching wanted fugitives. So this could be suggesting that the world is actually structured more sensibly and realistically, and that there are roads connecting Shinra's two biggest cities. They'd have to make some pretty big changes to the world's layout to make this possible. Or I guess they could just have a road cutting through the mountains, like a big industrial company that hates the environment anyway would probably do, but whatever. Of course, they could also just be little cameos hidden in the trailer since, as I said before, everything here is pre-rendered and not representative of the final product. But then again, it feels like a very specific thing to add if there aren't actually roads in your world, so it could go either way. Personally, I'm really hoping for a version of the planet that has transportation that actually makes sense. Seriously, Rufus, you have a fleet of long-range bombers. Why do you need the tiny Bronco? It can only carry like 2 people. How did you even get here? Before I completely move away from the road, allow me to point out a few typical trailer analysis things, since people are inevitably going to say that I missed them if I don't. The model of truck that Zack and Cloud escape in is seen here, and we've also got recycled art of Aya from the 3rd birthday, filling in for the model on the My Bloody Valentine Loveless poster. Also, little thing that probably doesn't mean anything, the girl in the park has a dolphin on her shirt. Call back to Mr. Dolphin, or the dolphin kick, whatever Tifa's move is called, where she does the dolphin thing. She does it, dolphin comes up from the ground. Okay, finally done going over all the design stuff in this trailer, let's move on to the actual trailer-y trailer stuff. First off, I want to look at this girl and the 2 other kids playing on the playground. People have been speculating like crazy about what they're looking at, and it's gone all over the place. Personally, I'm not going to waste my time speculating on this because it could be just about anything. It could be the end of the game, it could be a reactor exploding, or it could just be visual effects to let us know that this is, in fact, Final Fantasy VII. After all, that green in and of itself is iconic. This scene is probably a nothing scene. A similarly nothing scene that is only here to remind us that this is, in fact, Final Fantasy VII, is the scene with this flower and the feather. We can see a reflection of an angel statue, seemingly with only one wing, and then this black feather falls next to a trod-upon flower. Subtle. The scene here with these 2 soldiers is significantly more interesting because these soldiers aren't recognizable. The Shinra uniform has shown up in many of these games and has never really been that heavily changed, but that isn't to say that they couldn't redesign them now. So it could just be a redesigned Shinra uniform. It could also be an Avalanche soldier, though. After all, Shinra wouldn't have much need to sneak around inside their own reactor, unless this is a group of Shinra soldiers setting up to ambush the party after the 2nd bombing scene. More likely this is just Avalanche though, since their outfits aren't identical and seem cobbled together, indicating that they aren't the sort of thing that was issued to them by a military. Also, they've got red armbands. Red armbands, or red cloths of some variety, showed up on the 3 Avalanche soldiers in the original game, and they showed up on many of the Avalanche soldiers that appeared in Before Crisis. Yeah, for those who don't know, there was actually another much larger, more militarized Avalanche before Barrett's group, but whatever, it's not important. Later, when the trailer decides to stop beating around the bush and just tell us exactly what it is, we see Barrett, or at least his back and his gun. He's actually got a new gun here. It looks pretty different from his default one, and it doesn't perfectly match up with any of his other guns from the game either. Barrett also looks much thinner than he does in his other appearances. Once again, this is an indication that the character design is subject to change. Someone is selling flowers up here. Could be Aerith, but this lady doesn't look all that much like her. While we originally encountered Aerith selling flowers on the top level of the city, and this scene is in the slums, like I said, she could have just been moved in this new game. And again, this trailer is super fake, and nothing we see here means anything beyond a mere suggestion of style. And that's honestly just about all there is to see in this trailer. That's why I waited to make this video, actually. Even if there was more to this trailer, its very nature as a totally pre-rendered teaser video with nothing from the final product means analyzing it further would be kind of pointless. Even though a lot of people probably just watched this trailer a dozen times and then left it at that, the much more important information about this game was the stuff that came out in interviews in the days that followed its premiere, so that's why I went over all that stuff at the very beginning. Hopefully, we'll get to see a slightly more useful trailer for the game later this year, but honestly, I wouldn't expect much more than another pre-rendered trailer like this. I mean, maybe we'll get an in-engine trailer, but the difference between an in-engine trailer and an in-game trailer is just about as big as the difference between a remake and a remaster. That's it for Final Fantasy VII Remake news out of E3 2015. What do you think of all this? Are you okay with the idea of changes being made to this game, or would you prefer to see a more exact recreation of the 1997 original? I'd like to hear your thoughts on the matter. If you'd like to see me analyze some other stuff out of E3, you can click on that link to my analysis of the Kingdom Hearts 3 trailer. Hopefully I'll be getting some other E3 videos out on this channel pretty soon, but that remains to be seen. My schedule is a bit tight at the moment. If you're watching this in the future and I did make any other videos about E3, there'll be a link to one of those things in the corner there. If I don't make anything else, I guess it'll link to something else fun. Who knows what it'll be? It's an adventure.